right. Let's see. Yeah, hello everyone. Cool. Hello everyone, my name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. Today we're doing a Korean spicy pork bulgogi, which comes from Korean BBQ cuisine. We're going to do it with a little bit of pork butt, because I could not find pork shoulder today. So we're going to do it with some pork butt, and I'm going to explain what the differences of those two things are, and what are the benefits of doing it with pork butt versus actually, what are the benefits of doing it with pork butt instead of pork shoulder, and why. If you have any questions, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. I don't know everything about pork or spicy pork or bulgogi, but I know lots of stuff, so hopefully I can be helpful or informative, or at the very least entertaining to watch. As always, if you're looking for the recipes, those always live over on my YouTube channel, so if you haven't checked that out yet, so if you're watching on Reddit, that's the channel at the bottom of the screen. We have those recipes, the long form recipes, they come out every Friday and then every Tuesday. As long as it's something that I can cook on a live stream, we'll usually be live streaming those recipes, which is why we're here today. So last Friday we came out with this recipe. It was really cool and really challenging to do without a grill and without a meat slicer. Really, actually, that's the real tricky part about making bulgogi, is that it's hard to do without a meat slicer. So today we're going to talk about all those things, so if you have any questions, feel free to drop your questions in the chat, and of course, if you haven't yet, head over to the YouTube, check out what that stuff is about. Every Friday, new recipes out. So okay, so what we're making today is a spicy pork bulgogi, which is a variation on a beef bulgogi, which is a more classic, I guess probably like more commonplace interpretation of a bulgogi. Generally, I believe actually the technical definition of a bulgogi, or a Korean bulgogi, is a thinly sliced piece of flank steak. So that comes from a cow, obviously. So what we're making today is a pork bulgogi, which I think is an Americanization of bulgogi. It comes from Korean American cuisine, which is essentially it's still very, very similar, but the marinade is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be a little bit spicier. It's the if you've ever seen a Korean like a Korean barbecue, it's the one that's bright red. It's that one. It's the one that's like, wow, that looks really spicy. That's what we're making today. So but technically speaking, when we talk about bulgogi, we're actually specifically talking about barbecue beef. So we're specifically talking about the variation of thinly sliced barbecue beef, which is as far as I consider it when I think about Korean barbecue. To me, what bulgogi is really referring to is the way that it's cooked, the way that it's grilled, and the way that it's sliced. Whereas like the term bulgogi is really just broadly referring to like a number of things that come from Korean barbecue. Although technically it is specifically addressing beef. So to that end, that is also why it is confusing to say pork bulgogi, because what that essentially is saying is like pork barbecue beef is essentially what you're saying. So it's a little bit confusing. But colloquially, though, we're talking about a form of Korean barbecue. So what's going to be tricky today specifically is that bulgogi is when you get it in a restaurant, I believe it is normally when you get that stuff in a restaurant, cut with a meat slicer. That's how they get that stuff so thin, because it's like basically like deli meat thin. And the only way to get meat that thin, like deli meat thin slices of meat, is with a deli slicer, which I don't have. So we're gonna try and do that with a knife and see how close we get. I guess you could probably maybe reproduce that with a mandolin, but I'm not gonna do that. So knife skills. Thank you. Yeah, I do a lot of chopping. It is the hallmark of how I cook stuff. So all right, yeah. So yeah, when you order this stuff in a restaurant, you'll probably recognize it more in most restaurants as like that stuff that the beef that's really thinly sliced. So it's like as if you're eating like a piece of like lunch meat. That it's like cut that thin. We're not going to cut it that thin today because that, I think, as far as I know, is not possible to do with a knife unless you have really good knife skills, which I can't chop that thin. So. We're going to try and get it as thin as possible. But I also don't think that it's necessarily the most important thing either. So we're going to get our pork as thin as we possibly can, but it is not going to be like deli meat thin. No. Cool. So starting things off, that was, we're doubling today, so that was actually 8 cloves of garlic. And then next is going to be about 2 inches of ginger. Today, if you're following the recipes, those are probably going to be in half because lately, when I've been live streaming, I've been cooking for my neighbors too, so we're doubling recipes a lot of the times on these recipes. So right now, I'm doubling everything that's on the recipe video, but if you're following the recipe, that should call for 4 cloves of garlic and 1 inch of ginger. And then for our garlic, we just smash that real good. And then give it like basically a rough chop. For our ginger, though, we're going for more of a consistent fine mince. Get that out of the way. And the reason that we have to be more specific with how we chop our ginger is because it is not nearly as delicate as garlic, which just sort of falls apart as soon as you smash it. So with ginger, sometimes I like to say is that if you really don't like doing knife stuff, you can also pass this through a microplane or just grate this stuff, which to me is like more work if you got to clean the microplane afterward. Although we are about to use a microplane too, so again, depends on what you hate doing more, I guess. A little bit more ginger than I want. So that's our garlic and ginger. You'll notice that I'm not setting anything aside today. We're not really doing mise en place because everything's going into one place. I'm just tossing this all into one bowl. And essentially everything that we're going to do except for the onion is going to be marinade stuff. So we're just doing one gigantic marinade, which we're then going to fry. And then toss in with some onions. And that's basically it. This recipe is pretty simple, all things considered. It's a lot of chopping, but other than the large amount of chopping, there's not a lot going on. It's mostly just the marinade. All right, so next up, this is, I've seen this called many different things. I have always referred to these as Asian pears. They're the pears that you see in Chinatown. Some people call it Chinese pears. You might also see it referred to as an apple pear because it's a pear that looks like an apple, obviously. Colloquially, it's the pear that you see in Chinatown. It's the pears that Chinese people are eating. As far as I'm concerned, I think that you could swap this out with a regular pear, and you'll be just fine. Although I know that that might be a little bit, yeah, might be a little bit of a cultural clash. At some points, I've also swapped this out with, I believe at one point I used a green apple, which not quite the same. So if you're trying to sub this, I would say go with a pear. That's probably the best or closest thing that you can get. But if neither of those things, or if you're trying to be accurate to the recipe though, go with the Asian pear. And it is also, I think, like the most like culturally accurate thing that you want to do with a spicy pork bulgogi, or I should say is bulgogi is. iconically done with a marinade using Asian pear. So this is probably like the most iconic, to me, the most defining part about a bulgogi is that it's marinated with an Asian pear. That to me is like the defining quality of bulgogi. So what I'm doing is I'm just peeling it really quickly, and then we're going to pass this through a microplane. So there, in a couple of other instances, I think like one or maybe two, I think there's two different recipes that we've done where we did a beef bulgogi. Yeah, I think there's two, because we did gimbap and then we also did, we did bibimbap. In both of those scenarios, I did this with a knife, so you can also just really fine mince your pear. Same reason that I fine mince my ginger instead of grating my ginger. That can get really tricky because it has to be really fine. So what we're essentially looking for here when we grate this stuff up is we're going to try and get like basically the consistency of applesauce. That's what we're looking for. And the reason for that is it's got to be so fine that it can sort of like incorporate with the marinade without having any like actual evidence that there is a pear going on. So we basically need to pulverize this pear into the point where it's basically just liquid. All right, so those are our peels. So here's our microplane, and then what we're going to do is just grate this straight into our bowl. Try not to grate our fingers off. If you're following the recipe, this should call for half of a pear. Today we're doubling, so this is going to be a whole pear that we're using today. To take texture from a pear, yeah. Yeah, this is one of my favorite parts about a bulgogi is that the really iconic aspect of it is that it has to be marinated in this pear. And there have definitely been, I want to say at least once, probably twice, or maybe even 3 times, where I didn't have a chance to get this pear. I remember that there was one day where I forgot to buy it, and I ran out to the grocery store at like 5 o'clock. And if you're ever in Chinatown at 5 o'clock, the grocery stores are not open. Chinatown grocery stores do not stay open past like 3:30. So I like went to like 3 different grocery stores looking for Asian pear. And I think that was the day where I did bulgogi using a green apple, which is not the same. This is not the same at all. Skin left there. Cool. So that's our pear. I don't know if you can kind of see it. I mean, yeah, you can kind of see it. If you look really closely, you can tell that the texture of our pear is like it looks like applesauce. That's what we're looking for here. So it should be like pulverized to the point where it is not recognizable as a solid anymore. And that's what we need in order for it to incorporate into our marinade really well. Oops, I missed one. That's all of our pear now. Okay, so for our marinade, we have a couple of ingredients that are pretty easy to swap, and then I think maybe 2 ingredients, yeah, to my head, 2 ingredients that are absolutely essential. Like you can't make this without these 2 ingredients, but most of everything else you can swap out pretty easily. Probably the one thing that you don't want to swap out is the Asian pear, which I just admitted to swapping out. Don't swap it out though. Which soy sauce? So first up, we're gonna go with a little bit of soy sauce. I often will start marinades with soy sauce because it works really well as sort of like foundational elements. That generally only applies for like East Asian cuisine. I don't really do that with like a lot of Southeast Asian stuff, so a lot of Thai food, a lot of Vietnamese stuff. Oftentimes we'll leave out the soy sauce, but definitely with things like Korean food, Chinese food, Japanese food even, we'll start off with a lot of soy sauce. Next, this is going to be some Japanese mirin, which is a sweet rice wine. I like mirin. I like mirin in a pork bulgogi marinade because it brings a little bit of sugar, which I love. Like a lot of what we're looking for today is going to be looking for sugar, looking for various ways of deriving sugar in our marinade. Next, this is going to be a tablespoon of fish sauce. Lots of fishy umami, and again, lots of sugar coming from fish sauce. Next is tablespoons of brown sugar. Brown sugar. I like using brown sugar pretty much any time that I can in lieu of plain old white sugar because I find that it has more of like a character to it. It's more malted. There's more distinguishable about it other than the fact that it is sweet. Lots of times you'll see that I will still use like white sugar. I just did a recipe for use white sugar, and the reason that lots of times I'll use white sugar is because if it's like very purely white, like we don't want to bias the color, those are the times where you'll see me leaving out the brown sugar and leave white sugar. I'm going to do a cookbook one day. I was planning on one. I was trying to get a grant to do it, and then they denied the grant. So now I just need to come up with the funding. It's not cheap. Cookbooks are expensive. So I was working to do a cookbook, and then I didn't get the grant. But if I do get a grant or find the money to do a cookbook, that would be super fun. But yeah, cookbooks, they're not cheap. That is pretty much the kind of sucks, but that's pretty much the only reason I've never gotten around to it. But essentially, if I did do a cookbook, it would basically just be a book form of the recipes on the website. It would basically just be putting all of those recipes that are on the website into a book. So, for what it's worth, that content already exists. It's already on the internet. So, looks like it would be delicious. Thank you. Cool. Hello to everyone just tuning in. By the way, my name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. If this is your first time tuning in, we're here at 6:30 PST every Tuesday. And every Tuesday, we're generally speaking, and every Tuesday when you see these live streams, what we're going to be doing is cooking through the recipes that come out on the YouTube channel, which are out every Friday. So the new recipes every Friday, and then every Tuesday, we'll generally be cooking through those recipes, which is what we're doing today. So if you haven't found that stuff on YouTube, by the way, definitely head over, check out what that stuff is, because there's lots of cool shit over there. Every Friday, new music, or every Friday, new recipes. Every Wednesday, there's new music, and then every Monday, that's where the short recipes come out. Those are the ones on Gift Recipe. If you follow my Gift Recipe, there's a whole chunk of pear. All right, cool. So we're mixing up our marinade here. As you can see, other than that one giant chunk of pear that somehow found its way in here, that probably slipped out of my hand. We're mixing up our marinade, and it is very, very liquidy, so there's no real signs of whole pear left behind anymore. That's what we're looking for. You know what? I was supposed to double this, and I forgot. Someone asked me at one point, I think it was pretty recently, that when I double recipes, do I double the marinades too? Which I don't necessarily think that you have to do that, but it depends on what the marinade is for. In today's case, this is actually the first time where I'm like pretty accurately doubling everything in the marinade. Lots of times when we're following recipes and I'm doubling stuff, when it comes down to the marinade, really what our goal is to just the meat itself is like fully incorporated with the marinade, and if you have to depending on like how much meat there's going on and like what is the volume of the meat itself. You may or may not actually have to double the entire marinade, which is useful because lots of times the stuff that you're using is really expensive. So like in this case, this gochujang is really expensive. In our case today, because this marinade is actually going to do a lot more than just marinade. It's actually going to be like the main thing. It's like the main sauce of our recipe today. I actually think it's really important, so we don't want to start skimping on this marinade today. So, by the way, I also talked through this. But the two ingredients that we don't want to skip is maybe the two most important things. I would even say that it might be more important than the actual pork. I think you could probably substitute pork out. You can't substitute these two ingredients. And that is 2 tablespoons of gochujang, which is a Korean chili powder, and 3 tablespoons of gochujang, which is a Korean like chili paste, so like a hot chili paste. As far as things that we can skip, these are the two that you really can't skip. They're the most important thing, I think. Smell-o-vision, yeah. So again, we're doubling here, so I'm using that's 6 tablespoons or cup, quarter cup and change, is that right? Yeah, quarter cup plus an 1/8 cup of gochujang. Again, we're doubling, so if you're following the original recipe, it should be 3 tablespoons. And this, by the way, anytime that you're working with gochujang, really, you should be wearing an apron because this stuff will splash and definitely ruin everything that you're working. All right, so that's our marinade. I'm going to set this aside real quick while we dive into our, let's do this onion first, and then we'll get to our pork. Probably going to regret this. Yeah, actually, let's get to our pork first. Generally speaking, when we prioritize, I guess this goes in, depends on what you're really prioritizing, but generally speaking, I like to chop the meats last if I can, because it just makes cleanup a lot easier. So you just clean the cutting board as the very last thing that you have to do, because after you cut meat, you pretty much always have to clean the cutting board. In our case today, we really should have started with this, and that is because there's not going to be a lot of time to do much marinating otherwise. So if you really want your marinade to go for the full course that it will like spend in the marinade, that means that you got to chop the meat first. Try and remember that when you prioritize your cook. All right, so today this is some pork butt. If you're following the recipe, I think in the recipe I said you could use either pork butt or pork shoulder. The reason that we're going with pork butt today is really just because I couldn't find pork butt or pork shoulder. So if you've got it, you can use either, as I guess like the name implies. Pork shoulder comes from the shoulder of the pig. Pork butt comes from the butt of the pig. So as far as like anatomy goes, they're really, really similar because they come from the same portions of the pig. But the difference being that I find that pork butt tends to be a little bit fatter, a little bit more fatty, which is really useful in stuff like stir fries and like anytime where you're trying to incorporate a lot of fat because there's a lot of animal fat that's going to render in your pork. In our case today, we're going to be able to derive plenty of fat from elsewhere, so I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal. But when I was at the butcher shop today, the pork shoulder didn't look super hot, so I'm going with pork butt instead. If you've got the time, so I got this fresh, but if you've got frozen meat, this is really useful to have. It's really useful to have this stuff partially frozen because it makes it a little bit easier to chop as thinly as we're trying to do today. So if your pork is already frozen, pull it out of the defrost a little bit early and it will make things a lot easier to deal with as you chop, as you'll notice while we're chopping today. This is going to be a little bit tricky to chop super thin because it is so fresh. I'm also, as I'm going along, carving off some of this fat. Some of this will render, so some of our pork fat is going to render into our stir fry, which is going to be nice. But if we've got too much of this stuff, it's actually not going to render, and we're just going to end up with big old chunks of fat in our stir fry, which is not what we're after. Go. As I'm chopping along, what we're looking for are like any really large chunks of fat, which doesn't appear to be a huge amount of. And then the other thing that I'm paying attention to is the grain of our pork. So I'm doing my best to chop against the grain as much as we can. So our grain is going in this direction. Excuse me. The grain is going in this direction, and we're chopping against it as much as possible. Again, that's also going to depend on like where those chunks of fat are existing. I'm also chopping around some bone here too. All right. So as you'll notice, this is not coming out deli thin because I don't think that that's possible. So I'm getting a little bit lazy and I'm not chopping this as thinly as I possibly can. But as you're chopping for yourself, you want this to be as thin as you possibly can get. Now that would be ideal. That's pretty thin. It's trippy watching it on both streams. Yeah, that is pretty trippy. I don't know that I would recommend doing that. There's probably some latency. I believe the YouTube one has a little bit more latency than the Reddit stream, which means that it's probably like almost a whole second behind, I think. So once again, I'm looking for, I don't think that you can see this on camera, but I'm looking for the grain of the pork. The reason that we want to chop against the grain of the pork as much as possible is because it will help keep the pork nice and tender. So as we like bite into it, that's also going to be really important because we're skipping some time on the marinade today too. But that is going to, as we cut against the grain, work in our favor as we like look for making our piece of pork to be as thin as or as tender as we possibly can get it without actually being able to slice it deli meat thin. No whistling is strong yet. That's actually because the compressor is so high. I should probably deal with that. I noticed that while I was sound checking today too. So this is the stuff that we want to remove here. This actually isn't just fat. Some of this is actually tendon. We definitely want to get out all of this tendon because that is basically inedible. Well, Chinese people disagree. I think as you like start like be really edible. That's not going to render. That's just going to be a chewy piece of pork that's somebody's going to have to spit out. So look out for that stuff. Right, that's our pork. So we did a pretty good job. We trimmed out not that much fat, which is nice. If you've got a good butcher, this pile of stuff that you're throwing out should be relatively minimal. In a couple of the shittier cuts of pork that I've gotten, that has represented probably close to an entire pound of pork in the past. So as you're buying your pork, those are the things that you want to pay attention to when you're at the butcher shop, is like how much of that stuff is there present in your cut of pork butt or cut of pork shoulder, or even like with things like steak, or even like when you're looking at like chicken thigh, stuff like that, how much of what's present is stuff that you're gonna throw away. So when you see like folks who are at the butcher shop and they're being really particular, this is also really true for like when people are like picking a cut of ribeye steak or picking a cut of like a New York strip steak, even like salmon. What they're doing when they're being really particular about the cut of meat that they're picking is paying attention to like how much of that stuff are you going to have to throw away. So what I look for when I'm at the butcher shop is things like bone, really large fat caps that I don't want. If it is a fat cap that I want, then a really large fat cap. If it's a fat cap that I don't want, like there's some pork that I've bought where there's a big cut of skin that's still attached. All of that stuff is just contributing to your weightage, and that weightage is going to determine how much you're paying. So you want to get as little of that as possible to maximize the amount of edible pork that you have going on. Cool, so here's our pork. I've just been throwing this into our marinade as we chop. I'm gonna give it a really quick toss. I've been tossing it as we've been chopping too. And then what we're ideally looking for here is to have this marinate for 30 minutes. This will not marinate for 30 minutes. This is probably going to marinate for like 10 minutes maybe. Probably not even that. Yeah, definitely. Like I definitely have seen lots of chefs just kind of throw the grizzly bits straight into the pork, and it's like it's not that big of a deal. It's just like there's going to be some bites where people are going to be a little bit annoyed when they're eating what you're cooking, because there's basically inedible pieces of pork. So we want to avoid that stuff. It takes a little bit of extra time, but it's worth the extra time because it's going to create a better eating experience. Nobody likes biting into that shit. It's really gross. All right, so moving on. So this is, again, the reason why I like to chop meats after chopping everything else is because we now have to go back to our cutting board. I probably should just buy a dedicated meat cutting board. That's probably something that I should do. I actually had one, and then I lost it. So I think I literally lost it in the dumpster at one point. So, but anyway, here we are, and we're chopping up our onions. What we're gonna do is, since we're having to wait for our pork to marinate anyway, is I'm gonna do this trick with this onion that I discovered is actually really useful. What we're going to do essentially is pull apart our onion each piece at a time. So if you want, you can just chop your onion normally, just knife straight down and go down with radial chops. What I've always found is a little bit annoying, is that it's always really difficult to get an even chop with that type of cutting because of the shape of an onion, because an onion is shaped conically, conically. Which means that no matter how you chop it, there's always going to be a little bit of onion that's not quite evenly shaped. So I think this was the video where I ran through this too. I can't get this apart. So what we're doing, I'm pulling the onion apart, and then what we're going to do is run through and chop this one piece at a time. And as far as I'm concerned, this takes, if you're just chopping a single onion, very minimally more time. So maybe takes another like 1 minute, and it will give you easily the most evenly chopped pieces of onion that I've come across. If I was like chopping in like bulk, like if I was prepping for like a service day. This would probably take longer than I'd want to. I would probably just chop an onion normally. But for our purposes today, this is relatively manageable amount of extra time, and it's going to make a huge difference to the evenness of our chop of onion. So if you've ever, by the way, chopped an onion or cooked up, like grilled an onion or throw an onion into a stir fry, and you've had like parts of those onions either come out still raw or even have other parts of it come out and they're like overcooked, like they're starting to burn. That's happening because the onion was chopped unevenly. So like the smaller bits are burning, the larger bits are not cooking all the way through. That's because it was cut unevenly, which is why figuring out how to chop an onion evenly is so important. We can, I guess, demonstrate how to do that without that method too. So I'll show, we can also run through what it looks like if you don't use that method. So I would say that took like maybe an extra minute. So without the method, what we're doing is we're looking for angle in our knife. I believe it's supposed to be 33 and change, a 33-degree angle, something like this. You can't really see this on camera because the camera is pointed directly down. But if this is straight 90 degrees, what we're looking for, this would be about 45, and then we're looking for about 30 degrees right there. And hypothetically, that is supposed to give you the most even chop to your onion without breaking it apart like we did on the first half. I don't know that this is making that much of a difference, but if you're really anal retentive about this like I am, I think that actually the best solution is to take them apart and start slicing. A little bit of extra time, but it's going to be worth it. So there's our onion. We're going to set this aside. This is going to go into our wok. This is going to be the last thing that we cook up. And it's basically, we're going to toss this in with our pork once the pork is done cooking. And we're going to have some nice grilled onions to go with our stir-fried pork. Yeah, you like the method better than the grid method with slicing down and then slicing parallel. Yeah, I agree. It depends like how much onion are we talking about. So if I was chopping like there have been days where I've been like prepped like 30 or 40 onions, and I'm probably not going to do that with 30 onions. That would take so long because it would literally just exponentially create more work times like every layer of onion because you have to do it with every single layer of onion. So it does for sure give you the most even chop. I don't know that it's necessarily that important. I am still on a mission for the middle ground between like amount of effort, amount of time saved, and like quality of onion chopped. We'll see. All right, so that's done with chopping. I think we're done with chopping. Here's our pork. We're gonna start grilling this up. Technically not grilling. All right, over on the stove, I've got my wok. We're going to get this ripping hot, and then we're going to do my favorite solution to grilling proteins without actually grilling proteins. So if you've got a grill, this is a great opportunity to just use your grill instead. I do have a grill, but it's out in the yard, and I don't really use it very often because it's really small and it's poorly maintained. So what I found my best solution for replicating the smokiness that comes from an open flame grill is with a really good wok sear. And I've used this method in a number of different things where we're looking for smoky qualities that don't call for a wok sear. We used the same method in our chicken masala, chicken tikka masala a couple of weeks ago too. Oh yeah, thanks man. Yeah, thank you for tuning in. Glad that you enjoyed the recipes. So we're going to be doing this in batch 2 pounds of pork butt, so this is going to take a little bit of time. This will probably take close to 20 minutes or so. And the only real reason that it's going to take that long is because we're doing such a high volume. I'm cooking two whole pounds of pork butt today, so. But if you're not doubling, I think when I did the original recipe without doubling, this sear process only took maybe like 10 minutes or so. So not nearly as long. Yeah, sizzle is good. We're looking. Anytime that you're wok cooking, really, you always want to hear that sizzle. If you don't hear the sizzle, it means that your wok isn't hot enough. And I definitely do that all the time. But as far as like perfection goes, we're always looking for. Anytime that you put something in a wok, you should hear it sizzling. And if it's not sizzling, if you don't hear that like aggressive sizzle, that means the wok that is underheated. Which is not that big of a deal, but it just means that you need to stop and let the wok reheat for a second. Our vent list is missing. Let's fix that. There it is. So we're going here for, what we're looking for here is should be about 2 minutes in each sear. And today, since I'm cooking in a wok, what I like to do is just give the wok a little bit of a rotation. And that's really just moving the cooking oil around so that, like as you'll notice as we're cooking, the oil, it tends to pull up right here in the center. That's really useful for things like shallow frying and stuff. So if you can shallow fry an egg in a round bottom wok, it's really useful because the oil pulls up in the center, so you just put the egg right in the center where that oil is, and you can basically deep fry an egg in that amount of oil, which is cool. With sears, however, because the oil is pulling up right here, this outer exterior rim of the wok is not actually getting as much oil, so we want to just give this a nice rotation to make sure that that oil is moving around. Yeah, otherwise things will burn. It's not good. You don't want that. Cool. Hello to everyone just tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Wookeng Cook. If this is your first time tuning in, we're here every Tuesday at 6:30 PST with new recipes out on my YouTube channel every Friday. So if you have not checked the YouTube channel out yet, definitely head over and check that stuff out. We're working our way up to 7,000 subscribers by the end of the month. So if you want to help us hit our subscriber goal, please subscribe. Lots of cool shit going on over there. There's a hamster. His name is Ham Charles. He's very hungry and only gets to eat when somebody subscribes. So please feed Ham Charles. Today, by the way, if you're just tuning in, today we're cooking a Korean spicy pork bulgogi, which if you're following like really traditional Korean cuisine definitions, bulgogi specifically is referring to barbecue beef. I believe even more specifically, barbecue flank steak is more specifically what it's referring to. Today, obviously, we're doing this with pork, but it is a little bit confusing when you refer to barbecue pork bulgogi because we're just saying this. Barbecue pork beef. It's basically what you're saying. It's confusing. But I believe spicy pork bulgogi is an Americanization. I think it comes from the Americanization of Korean barbecue. At the moment, because I don't have a grill, actually I do have a grill, but I don't have a camera over my grill. So at the moment, we're using my favorite solution to apartment grilling, or like grilling, replicating the effects of a grill in a tiny apartment, which is a good solid wok sear like this. Don't overload the wok like we have here. That should give you some decent wok, but The wok is too full for that right now. It is entirely my fault. Small. All right. So we're batch cooking here. I think this is probably going to take a number of batches because the wok is overheating or is underheating, which is what I just noticed with that first batch. So we're going to have to do slightly less. As you sort of like learn the heat properties of your range, you get better at like estimating how full you can fill up your wok. In our case today, because we're cooking on a gas range, but also because we're cooking 2 pounds of pork, which is a lot, you need to pay attention to how full are you going to be allowed. Is your gas range or is your cooking range going to allow you to fill up your wok? And again, what we're looking for is that nice loud sizzle going on there. That's a sign that your wok is hot enough. And as you sort of like start tossing, you should hear more sizzling. If you don't hear that sizzling, that's because the wok is underheated. And most importantly, we never want our wok to be underheated because it's a sign that you're heading for a mushy stir fry, which is never what we're after. Alright, so that's about as full as I want my wok to get today. Any more full than that and it's going to start overfilling and underheating, which is not what we're after. So in batches about this size, this is probably going to take about 4, maybe 5 batches or so. So again, I actually think that this is a relatively common small apartment solution. Is like, or at least for bulgogi, is pan searing that bulgogi. But I actually think if you take it one more step further and do it in a wok, you're going to get a little bit more smokiness and a little bit more crisp edges if you do it in a wok, like is what we're doing today. You could also, if you don't have it available though, you could also do this in like a cast iron pan. Anything heavy bottomed, you could do it in a stainless steel pan, anything that's capable of retaining really high heat. Cool. That's a little bit better. So I'm tossing, once we finish searing after 2 minutes, I'm giving it a quick toss and then we're basically pulling it off maybe about a minute after that. It is not cooked all the way through and that is totally okay. because there's going to be one more cook that happens after this. Once we finish searing, we're going to throw everything back into the wok and cook for another 5 minutes or so. So you absolutely don't need to cook your pork all the way through at the first stage. And in fact, I would recommend pulling it off before it's finished cooking. Otherwise, you might end up with overcooked pork. Pot of coins, that's a new one. I don't think I've seen that one before. Thank you for the awards. I should always remember to say that. Thank you for all of the awards. That's really cool. Thank you for everyone tuning in that can't give awards to. I appreciate all of you. Pot of coins. Wonder if that's coins or if it's just a name for an award. Things that make you go, So if you were, by the way, this also just occurred to me. If you were to order this in a restaurant, most Korean barbecue restaurants, you would see it served on the cast iron skillet. Like probably on like a sizzle plate, like a cast iron sizzle plate, and then it would like continue to sear on that sizzle plate. So what we're doing in the wok is essentially replicating that without the right proper cookware. I think we can still come pretty close, and we're essentially trying to replicate that quality of like restaurant sizzle. Hugs. Ooh, thank you. Cool. Lots of bear-themed ones. Oh, golden pan. I have definitely gotten that one. That's cool. Golden pan, I think, is like specifically for cooking. Maybe that's specifically for cooking. Thank you, Peppermint Monoke, though. I appreciate that. That's really cool. It also like extends the airtime too, which is nice. Although we haven't run out of airtime in a while. I used to run out of airtime. There we go. That's what we're looking for. If you. You don't have to go for that. Anytime that you're going wok, that's essentially what you call wok, which is essentially what we're trying to do is catch the fat on fire. So as we're rendering fat, that pork is rendering fat into solidified fat into liquid fat. And as we go for wok, I guess in like Chinese, you're referring to like the breath of the wok. What we're trying to do is ignite that fat, and if you ignite it, you can impart a little bit more smokiness and like smoky qualities to the thing that you're searing, which is like kind of the whole point of what we're trying to do right now, is like replicate the smokiness that comes from barbecuing. You don't have to do that. It's absolutely optional. If you don't get a real solid wok, but the downside to doing that is you have to get pretty close to dropping food into the grates of your fire, which is not super ideal. Done it a few times. Kind of sucks. Nearly there. Cool. So you'll notice that as we're finishing or working through our batches, I'm not going super heavy-handed on the oil, mostly adding like about a tablespoon at a time or so, and more or less going as easy as I possibly can on the oil. At a certain point, you still have to add oil, or else things will start burning. But we want to try and hold back that oil as much as we can, because remember that every time that you pull something out of a batch cook, it's still going into the food. It is still going into the bowl where you're going to be serving from, which means that if you overdo it on the oil in each batch, you could end up with a very, very oily stir fry, which is, in my opinion, one of the biggest downsides of batch cooking is that things can get really oily really quickly if you're not careful. Probably the biggest downside is that it takes a really long time. Batch cooking takes a super long time because you have to cook things very, very slowly. So again, I guess maybe the biggest upside of a wok burner, if you have a wok burner or a commercial range, if you've got a commercial style range, or anything that can pump out a lot of heat, is that you could do this a lot faster. Walk this way. Yeah. A while ago we were working on figuring out names for our pop-up, which we ended up settling on Wu Can Cook. Just the name of the pop-up is the name of the channel. But we were running through pretty much every wok pun that exists. And that was one of the very first ones that we came up with, Walk This Way. A lot of the really good ones are already taken too, like Walks of Life. That's a really good one, is Walks of Life. But that's a very well-known vlog. We can't take Walks of Life. Walk in the Park, that's a good one. A Walk to Remember, another good one. Many good wok puns, many of which are already taken though. Walk This Way for sure is a copyright thing. We would not be able to use Walk This Way. There we go. Cool, so we're on almost our last batch. We've got one more batch coming up after this, and then we should be wrapping up soon. Last batch. to do it. Cool. So here's our last batch. While we wait for our last batch, to take a look at our finished pork here. Come on. There you are. So here's the every other batch that we've been cooking through here. As you can see, there's a good amount of oil going on here. Most of that is going to be okay. That's actually mostly going to contribute to the deliciousness. Actually, a lot of that is pork fat too. But as we batch cook, we want to pay attention to how much oil we're adding, because it's all going back in here. Don't forget that. Cool. So on our last batch, we're gonna go ahead. I might just leave this last batch in because it's relatively close anyway. We're gonna throw in our onions. We're gonna give it a little bit of head start. I like to give these onions maybe a minute or two head start. And a lot of this is going to start releasing liquid from the onions, which is a good way to start deglazing and take advantage of the remaining left behind fats and juices that are still going on in our wok. So you'll notice that in a lot of batch cooks, you will see me start deglazing stuff, and then just start cleaning out the wok with each batch, which is kind of another downside to batch cooking, is that you can't make use of things like fond, which is really unfortunate. In our case today, I'm going to go ahead and leave all of that stuff in. The downside to that, as you leave that kind of stuff behind, is that you are more at risk of getting burnt stuff in your wok, like what we're picking out right now. All of this stuff, that's just carbonized crap that we don't want in the wok. So that's the downside to not cleaning out your wok in between each batch. The bonus is, look how good these onions look. That's the bonus. So we gave those onions maybe a solid minute head start before adding everything back to the wok. And then we're just going to toss everything, give it maybe another 2 minutes or so, let these onions kind of cook down a little bit, and we should be ready to eat. Try not to drop stuff though. Yeah. let that go for maybe another minute or so. We're mostly just looking at these onions and making sure that they're cooked all the way down. If you like raw or close to raw onions, you can pull it off now, and it would be relatively okay. This is more or less the point where you would see stuff served in the restaurant. And then you would see a lot of carryover cook happening with the onions on the plate. Yeah, that'll do it. Alright, so the last thing that we want to do anytime that we're cooking in carbon steel, especially in carbon steel woks, is we want to clean the wok while it's hot. This is very useful. And I have started saying this as a reminder pretty much every time that we cook in this wok. It takes an extra 30 seconds, a little bit annoying because you want to start eating, but do yourself a favor, clean your wok while it's hot like this. I just did very minimally, a very minimal amount of scrubbing just now. That was basically just enough to sort of like rinse things off, and that was about it. And then what I'm doing is I'm throwing it back on the fire, and we're going to let that just sort of like evaporate some liquid there, and that's going to be it. Carbon steel, very important. When it's wet, we want to make sure to dry it off completely. And I'm going to like really dry it off. It has to be completely dry before you store it, because anything that's still wet will oxidize and essentially just rust, which is why I like throwing it back on fire, is to just make absolutely sure that everything is nice and dry, like so. Alrighty. Here's our rice. Let's start setting up a plate here. By the way, here's our finished pork. Alright, there's our pork. Then we're going to serve this with a couple of sides. What I like to do is go with really crisp veggies, because spicy pork is very overwhelmingly pork. So what I like to do is try and cut all of that richness as much as we possibly can. So that's some fresh cucumbers. If you don't have cucumbers, you can use daikon, you can use radish, you can use cabbage even. You can just skip it and go with kimchi instead. That would be a great option. Lots of different solutions that you can go with here. You could use bean sprouts. That's a really good one too. And then finally, we're going to serve this with a little bit of lettuce. So, I like doing this with purple lettuce because it's really pretty. But I think in the recipe video, I didn't have a chance to get purple lettuce, so we just used plain old romaine, I think. And the reason that we serve this with this is because it's pretty. But what we're gonna do is we'll wrap this with chopsticks. Then we're gonna add this to our lettuce wrap, like so. A little bit of rice, and a little bit of kimchi. And that is how you would eat this in a lettuce wrap, like so. Really fun to do with really pretty rice or lettuce. Very excited to eat this. Looks delicious. Yeah, thank you. Thanks to everyone tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Wu Can Cook. If this is your first time catching one of these streams, we're here every Tuesday at 6:30 PST with new recipes out on the YouTube channel every Friday. So if you're watching on Reddit, that's the YouTube channel that's at the bottom of the screen. We've got those new recipes that are out every Friday. So the long form recipes are out every Friday. And then every Monday we release the short form recipes. So if you're following this channel from GIF recipes, those are the recipes that come up on GIF recipe every week. And then every Wednesday, I haven't done new music in a while, but usually every Wednesday there should be new Wu Cook Speed stuff, which are the tunes that we're about to spin when I sign off. So lots of cool stuff coming out every week. So if you want to give our channel a subscribe, we're working our way up to 7,000 subscribers. So if you want to help us hit our subscriber goal, please hop over and subscribe. Lots of cool stuff living over on that channel. What else? Last Friday, so we're cooking through this today, which means last Friday we came out with this recipe, which was a really fun one to do, and it's inspired by they actually made this. This was actually one of the dishes in the zombie apocalypse Korean film, Korean TV show on Netflix called All of Us Are Dead, which is really popular right now. Which is funny because it's it's like an internment camp meal, which is meant to be like an MRE basically. So it's supposed to look really disgusting, but it's actually just like, it's straight up this. They're eating this out of like a lunchbox, which is like, that's a really good looking meal for an internment camp. So, so that recipe over on the YouTube channel already. And then this Friday coming up, we have a recipe for something that I don't remember. Let's see, this Friday coming up is a recipe for, oh yeah, we're doing P.F. Chang's pepper steak, which is going to be really fun. Because of the P.F. Chang's pepper steak, if you've never had it, is basically just Mongolian beef with a couple of extra steps, I think. Like, it's basically Mongolian beef with black pepper. That's basically how they made that dish. It will also be the 100th recipe video, which I'm super excited for, because it means that we've been doing this for 100 weeks, which is a really long time. So that's coming up this Friday, so I'll see you then. All right, I'll be here doing dishes. Let me know if you have any questions. Feel free to drop them in the chat, and I should be here to answer stuff in the chat still too. So, all right, bye everyone.
It's like strawberries on a summer evening, and it sounds just like a song. I want more berries and that summer feeling. It's so wonderful and warm. Breathe me in, breathe me out. I don't know if I could ever go without. I'm just thinking out loud. I don't know if I could ever go without watermelon sugar high, watermelon sugar high, watermelon sugar high, watermelon sugar high, watermelon sugar. Strawberries on a summer evening. Baby, you're the end of June. I want your belly and that summer feeling, getting washed away in you. Breathe me in, breathe me out. I don't know if I could ever go without watermelon sugar high, watermelon sugar high, watermelon sugar high, watermelon sugar high. twice was enough, and it was all in vain. Time starts to pass before you know it, you're frozen. Ooh. But something happened for the very first time with you. My heart melted to the ground, found something true, and everyone's looking round, thinking I'm going crazy. But I don't care what they say, I'm in love with you. They try to pull me away, but they don't know the truth. My heart's crippled by the vein that I keep on closing. You cut me open and I keep bleeding, keep bleeding. I keep bleeding, I keep bleeding. Keep bleeding, keep bleeding. You cut me open, trying hard not to hear, but they talk so loud. Their piercing sounds fill my ears, try to fill me with doubt. Yet I know that the goal is to keep me from falling. Hey, but nothing's greater than the risk that comes with your embrace. And in this world of loneliness, I see your face. Yet everyone around me thinks that I'm going crazy. Maybe, but I don't care what they say. I'm in love with you. They try to pull me away, but they don't know the truth. My heart's crippled by the vein that I keep on closing. You cut me open and I keep bleeding, keep bleeding. I keep bleeding, I keep bleeding. Keep bleeding, keep bleeding.
Baby hair with a woman's eyes, I can feel you watching in the night. All alone with me, we're waiting for the sunlight. When I feel cold, you warm me, and when I feel I can't go on, you come and hold me. It's you and me forever. I want you smile for me, Sarah. If you feel like leaving, you know you can go. But why don't you stay until tomorrow? If you wanna be free, you know, all you got to do is say so. And when you feel cold, I warm you. And when you feel you can't go on, I'll come and hold you. It's you and me forever. I want you to smile at me, Sarah. Sarah, smile. I want you to smile, Sarah.